Coca-Cola CEO says it may ramp up use of plastic bottles and raise prices due to President Trump's 25% tariff on aluminum air imports. We may have short-term, some little pain, and people understand that. But long-term, the United States has been ripped off by virtually every country in the world. This comes after President Trump announced a 25% tariff on foreign aluminum. Coca-Cola expects the tariffs will not radically change its packaging operations, but it will bring a significant cost increase. Coca-Cola is already pushing the price of a can from $1 to $2, and Americans are facing a serious spending crisis. That's the latest announcement from Coca-Cola after Mr. Trump's aluminum tariffs officially took effect in just one night. The import tariff on aluminum was raised from 25% to 50%, pushing raw material costs for each can of Coca-Cola up by roughly 40 to 50, equivalent to 20 to 25% of its retail price. The result is devastating. Billions of Coke cans produced in the US now face potential price hikes, directly impacting over 200 million consumers across the country. Amid rising inflation and living costs, a soda can, once seen as an everyman's refreshment, has suddenly become a luxury item instead of flashy CEO footage. Today's story will dive into everyday life, from rushed lunch breaks to catching up with friends at diners where a can of Coke is no longer $1 but a burden on Americans. Wallets join Deep State for today's latest economic report to find out what steps Americans should take to escape their current tight spending situation. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the great content coming from us. Music. When the America First policy was launched, the Trump administration abruptly announced an increase in the import tariff on aluminum from 25% to 50%, citing the need to protect the domestic metals industry from unfair competition. This decision was unveiled during a speech at a steel mill in Pittsburgh, where the president stressed, "We cannot allow foreign countries to bleed America dry in front of thousands of heavy industry workers." Almost overnight, domestic aluminum prices surged. According to Reuters, premiums on spot aluminum in the US hit a record $60 per pound, nearly $1,123 per ton, just days after the new tariff took effect. In that context, the beverage sector, especially Coca-Cola, became an unattended victim. Aluminum accounts for more than 70% of the weight of Coca-Cola cans consumed domestically, and nearly all of that metal must be imported. Canada, as the primary supplier, provides over 60% of US aluminum imports, while Brazil and other markets contribute only a small fraction. This heavy reliance on foreign inputs caused canning costs to skyrocket, and the ultimate casualty has been the consumer. What's more, closing the supply gap with domestic production is virtually impossible. In the short term, since 1980, the number of primary aluminum smelters in the US has fallen from 33 to just 6, with only 4 operating at full or partial capacity. According to the US Geological Survey, USGS current utilization sits at only about 52% of total design capacity, forcing the US to source more than 54% of its aluminum from abroad. Any expansion or restart of US facilities would take at least 2 to 3 years and require overcoming high electricity costs and multi-billion-dollar infrastructure investments. With the domestic industry unable to catch up, canning plants have simply passed the extra cost onto the final product. By rough calculation, each Coca-Cola can now carries an additional 40 to 50 cents of aluminum premiums, 20 to 25% of its production cost. That margin doesn't just push retail prices from $1 closer to $2, it also delivers a psychological shock when an icon of affordable American refreshment suddenly becomes a luxury at a time when households are already squeezed by inflation and rising healthcare and automotive expenses. Nearly 50 cents more per can quietly heaps more burden onto American wallets. Coca-Cola's predicament is in fact a direct consequence of aggressive protectionism. although the policy's original goal was to spur reshoring and safeguard domestic jobs. In reality, it has inflicted severe damage on downstream industries where raw materials dominate costs. The problem stems from a tariff that was imposed too quickly and too harshly without any roadmap to support US producers in expanding capacity, leading to supply shortages at the height of summer demand as those first Coke cans rolled off production lines carrying the weight of soaring costs. More than 200 million American consumers were left bearing the fallout. Next, we'll delve into Coca-Cola's response to this unprecedented cost shock, but first imagine this scene at convenience stores and supermarkets. Across the nation, a can of Coke is no longer an everyday treat, but a coveted indulgence. Will the soda drinking habits of hundreds of millions be shaken? The answer is revealed in the next segment. Since President Trump slapped a 50% import tariff on aluminum input costs for the soda can packaging, industry have skyrocketed like never before. A Reuters report revealed that premiums on spot aluminum in the US hit a record 60 cents per pound, nearly $1,123 per ton, just days after the new tariff took effect. In reality, producing a single 12-oz Coca-Cola can, about 0.75 pounds of aluminum, now carries an extra $42.50 in raw material costs. That may sound small, but for a drink consumed by over 200 million Americans and generating billions in annual production, this cost burden is crushing. This isn't Coca-Cola's first shock. Back in 2023, when the Trump administration first imposed a 25% aluminum tariff. Coca-Cola had to raise its average retail price by about 3 to 4% to offset higher costs, yet doubling the tariff rate. This time packs a far heavier punch, leaving Coca-Cola's leadership caught between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, hiking prices risks alienating loyal consumers, especially younger and lower income groups who treat $1 Coke cans as their go-to refreshment. On the other, holding the line on price would wipe out hundreds of millions in quarterly profits, given annual sales exceeding 28 billion cases. Switching to alternative packaging only deepens the dilemma. PET plastic bottles might seem a quick lifeline, but each PET bottle costs 5 to 7 cents more than an aluminum can and clashes with Coca-Cola's long-standing plastic waste reduction goals. Glass may score points for sustainability, but its heavy, fragile nature can add 15 to 20% to shipping costs, driving retail prices even higher. This saga isn't merely Coca-Cola's tragedy, it's a vivid warning of runaway protectionism by slapping on steep new tariffs without a phased support plan for domestic aluminum producers. The policy has forced over 200 million Americans to foot the bill. Meanwhile, US smelters operate at just 52% capacity and need at least 2 to 3 years to ramp up production. There is simply no quick fix to soften the current cost shock. As a result, even splashy promotions, budget combos, or high-profile marketing campaigns can't mask consumers' fury at paying nearly double for a once humble soda. Within a week of the tariff announcement, many convenience store chains saw Coke sales plunge 8 to 10% according to preliminary NPD Group data. And as inflationary pressures mount across the economy, that decline could worsen, all told. This tariff blow leaves Coca-Cola facing the stark choice of popularity or profitability, and neither option looks easy when viewers realize that behind every can of Coke, there's an extra hefty surcharge. They'll wonder, can America's iconic soda rebuild trust music? The answer hinges on Coca-Cola's long-term strategy, but for now, these once ubiquitous cans stand as symbols of a no-mercy tariff war when squeezed to death by a 50% aluminum tariff. Coca-Cola was forced to pull out all the stops just to keep production and revenues afloat. One of the company's very first moves was to shift can manufacturing to Facilities in Mexico and Brazil, where labor and infrastructure costs are somewhat lower, yet that was no tax escape route under the new rules. Every aluminum can imported into the US, no matter its origin, carries the full 50% levy in Brazil. Even after local authorities cleared Solar's partner plant to resume operations following a technical glitch, any beverages shipped back to America immediately suffered a double whammy of duties as soon as they hit port, with the domestic market growing ever more stifling. Coca-Cola dramatically pivoted toward outlets beyond US shores. Its Q2 earnings report showed North American volumes down 3%, but global sales still rising, thanks to surging demand in China. India and Brazil, Coca-Cola Zero. Sugar alone saw a 14% volume jump in those regions that not only demonstrated a buffer against the tariff shock, but also confirmed the company's multi-market strategy that leadership has been doubling down on this year. Yet the cost-cutting race didn't stop at relocating production in its shareholder filing. CFO John Murphy admitted the business was pulling multiple levers to manage expenses, delaying certain R&D initiatives, and slashing marketing budgets to preserve cash flow. Insider accounts reveal Coca-Cola cut roughly 10% of its global ad spend and shelved sponsorships of major music and sports events. Until the trade tension clouds clear, even so, tightening the purse strings has dimmed the brand's media muscle, raising questions about its long-term competitiveness against rivals like PepsiCo, which continues to invest heavily in marketing, refusing to watch America's everyday soda get priced into luxury status. Coca-Cola also spearheaded the Food and Beverage Alliance, dozens of industry giants, PepsiCo Monster Beverage, Keurig, Dr. Pepper joined forces lobbying the government to roll the aluminum duty back to 30 to 35% and ease the chokehold on domestic production. Immediately after the alliance's launch, Canada's Chamber of Commerce blasted the US tariff hike for wrecking cross-border supply chains and threatening a critical metal sector. Yet, American officials have offered no clear concessions so far, leaving alliance members anxious about the near future. Coca-Cola's turnaround from moving production offshore and diversifying markets to slashing internal spending and lobbying policymakers lays bare the brutal pressure a 50% tariff exerts not only on one company but on the entire bottled beverage value chain as American consumers tighten their belts. Coca-Cola's dilemma of all sizzle and no stake in its most vital market poses a formidable challenge for any brand over the coming week. Watch closely as the tug-of-war between protecting domestic industry and preserving consumer welfare plays out, and see whether Coca-Cola can carve out a sustainable escape hatch from this unprecedented tariff blow. When the aluminum tariff rocketed to 50%, it wasn't just Coca-Cola in the crosshairs. The entire US soft drink industry staggered under an unprecedented blow to input costs. Even PepsiCo, home of the iconic Pepsi, was forced to abandon decades of stable pricing, either hiking retail prices or eating the extra cost and profit to avoid alienating customers. According to Reuters, the moment the tariff landed, US spot aluminum prices jumped 54%, driving can sheet prices to their highest level in years. Even more alarming, a Spirits Europe analysis warned that beverage sector revenues could plunge by as much as 20% over the next 6 months, as restaurants, bars and supermarkets rethink their orders in light of soaring prices. Meanwhile, PepsiCo itself admitted North American soda volumes fell 3% last quarter, despite a 5% price hike intended to offset higher costs taken together. These figures strongly suggest the US soft drink market could see overall revenue drop by roughly 15 to 20% within just half a year of this tariff freeze. The pressure didn't stop there. It rippled through the supply chain. Aluminum can manufacturers were forced to slash orders and cut production, with an internal Alcoa report warning that the 50% tariff threatens up to 80,000 jobs, in aluminum and related sectors, including can-making facilities, narrowing the focus. At least 5,000 workers at Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and local soda bottlers face layoffs or hour cuts, as plants throttle back capacity to balance the books. And let's not forget, the consumer hit metal price shock has driven up what Americans pay for Coke or Pepsi cans by 15 to 30%, where a 12 Oz Coke once sold for about $1. Now retail prices hover around $1.25 to $1.30. Pepsi followed suit to protect its margins for 21 to 54-year-olds, especially students and hourly wage earners. These so-called small tweaks become real financial burdens, pushing them toward cheaper alternatives, like bottled water tea bags or budget sodas from lesser-known brands. Many have likely noticed office snack bars, campus cafeterias, and convenience store shelves shifting from rows of cans to stacks of bulky plastic or glass bottles, not just because of cost, but because you shouldn't pay an arm and a leg for your favorite drink. In fact, the drop in aluminum can consumption has also disrupted the just-in-time model of many retailers, causing spot shortages and wildly varying prices across regions. When a product once emblematic of everyday American culture suddenly takes on an air of luxury, it forces a sobering question: if even Coke cans can be shaken by this tariff quake, what fate awaits other everyday essentials? And how will the U.S. consumer economy navigate the coming storm of trade levies? At the peak of the tariff fight, even within the Republican Party, cracks began to appear in Georgia. Numerous local businesses, from canning plants to convenience store chains, warned that a 50% tariff would strangle the metal packaging industry and drive production costs sky high, forcing them either to raise prices or shrink operations. A similar scene unfolded in Ohio, where several GOP state legislators sent a letter to the White House urging a cutback of the tariff to 30% to save the beverage sector and thousands of related jobs. Music. Even in Washington, the House once debated a bill to roll the aluminum tariff back to 30% to rescue consumers and domestic businesses. But it has not yet reached a floor vote on the federal stage. Senate Majority Leader John Thune declared he would not intervene to reverse the president's tariff policy, arguing that Congress should let this protectionist struggle play out and prove its worth in real markets. The absence of consensus at the top level means that state-level proposals to tweak the tariff face slim odds of becoming law among the public. The outcry exploded all over social media, according to TikTok. Creative Center data, the hashtag #SaveOurCoke has appeared in over 2 million videos, with hundreds of thousands of comments lamenting, "No more 99 cents, how can this still be the national drink?" Teen YouTubers and TikTokers immediately began posting scathing clips showing cans of Coke double-priced in harsh reality. Even Coca-Cola's longtime rival PepsiCo seized the moment to jab back the company, launched a free glass bottle ad campaign on YouTube, slightly pointing out that while Coca-Cola battles aluminum tariffs, consumers can choose glass bottles which aren't subject to the levy to save money. Meanwhile, the Aluminum Association publicly praised efforts to boost domestic output, but warned that building new smelters would take at least 5 years and billions in investment time. Mr. Trump simply cannot afford to wait. As they put it, looking ahead, the U.S. government is under mounting pressure to negotiate with its two largest aluminum suppliers, Canada and Brazil, in preliminary talks. Ottawa signaled willingness to support a domestic sourcing roadmap in exchange for a tariff cut to 35%. Analysts believe such a cooling-off deal could be struck before the end of summer, aiming to prevent further declines in domestic consumption and forestall retaliatory tariffs from major trading partners. From political squabbles to public outrage and rival tactics, It's clear the aluminum tariff battle isn't just squeezing Coca-Cola's profits. It's threatening the very survival of America's entire soft drink industry and its supply chain, with consumers, patients wearing thin, and lawmakers hesitating. Will this hardline tariff policy soften in time to restore confidence? It's Mr. Trump who now faces the critical question of whether to stand firm or steer a course correction before a fresh cost crisis engulfs the nation from a $1 Coke can to $2 in the wake of one Trump declaration. Americans have been blindsided as their once everyday national drink transforms into a luxury item. The aluminum tariff jump from 25% to 50% drove raw material costs up by 40 to 50 cents per can, sending retail prices spiraling to nearly double the America First rallying cry aimed to protect domestic metals. Yet it has instead seen economic crisis. At America's heart, the long-term fallout won't stop at Coke unless this tariff is rolled back in time. A host of other beverage brands, Red Bull, Monster and more, are likely to exit the US market in search of steadier input supplies when consumers are forced to pay higher prices. Confidence in trade policy erodes, an ominous sign ahead of the midterm elections, as voters may view protectionism as a policy that fails to serve their interests. Is this the wake-up call, proving that protectionism doesn't always protect Americans? Or are we on the brink of further production relocations, price hikes and runaway inflation? Drop a comment. Would you pay an extra $1 for each Coke can? Or will you seek out alternatives to keep your refreshment habit intact? Let's watch closely and question the policy. Is protectionism really the best path, or merely a costly trap for consumers? And don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest updates.